This is terrific. I am really heartened to see so many people come out who are concerned citizens on this level, and a lot of old friends who I've worked with for many years, and along with some people I don't know. But much appreciation to all of you for coming out. This has been a long road. 2009, we discovered through the hard work of our researcher at C10, Debbie Grinnell, that there was a lot of email traffic and other traffic on the internet having to do with this phenomenon at Seabrook called ASR, whatever the heck that was. And so, Debbie tried to convince board members at C10, this is something that we have to pay attention to. Well, Debbie, this is concrete. I mean, what do we know about concrete? And are we really going to be that interested in reading about concrete? But Debbie persisted, like Debbie always does, because she's completely a bulldog when it comes to discovering what is important and pressing people to get working on it. So 10 years in, we have gone through 3 entirely separate legal actions having to do with ASR, Alkali Silica reaction at Seabrook. We filed a rulemaking petition around 2014, attempting to get the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to adopt already existing standards that had been set by institutes like the American Concrete Institute for dealing with ASR on structures. And that is because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission never put in place any standards for dealing with this problem, even though alkali silica reaction is a very well-known problem in concrete structures. They didn't have a way to deal with it. And that action is still pending. There's never been an answer from NRC on whether they would adopt ACI and other standards for dealing with ASR. The second thing, after another year, in a kind of a frustration because no action was being taken, we decided that we were going to file an emergency enforcement action to try to get the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to actually regulate under the auspices of these standards that we had asked them to adopt. And of course that backfired on us because they said that, well, there are no standards in place, so you can't force us to enforce them. So that was our whiff at the plate, and we regrouped, and we got to 2017 and realized that there was a deadline looming where if we wanted to file contentions having to do with a license amendment request that the owners of Seabrook Next Era had filed for managing the ASR at Seabrook, we had to do it right then. So over the course of less than 2 weeks, a number of us on the C10 board, along with Natalie's help as our executive director at the last minute with a tremendous save, we actually managed to get our contentions filed. We had 10 contentions. And with a lot of back and forth from the nuclear industry and some very good luck on our part, we actually won standing before the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board for 5 contentions, which were rolled into one overarching contention that has to do with the topic of representativeness. The overarching concept here is representativeness. And that is because many of you have heard this story from me before, so please, all of the board members know this by heart because we've been working on it for so long. But basically, the owners of Seabrook saw fit, rather than to test existing concrete from, for instance, Unit 2, there's a whole second unit at Seabrook that has never been operated and is therefore not radioactive and is therefore not any problem for them as far as interfering with operation. Instead of testing that concrete, they decided to make their own concrete. And they made their own concrete in Texas from aggregate and sand from another part of the country, and decided that they would call that representative of Seabrook Concrete. Well, none of us were experts in this. I mean, it's obvious to you as you're listening to me that I'm no expert in this, but even we knew that there was something fishy about this whole scheme. And we decided to, try to find the experts necessary, and through some tremendous good luck on our part, we found our way to Dr. Victor Saouma, and Dr. Victor Saouma found his way to us. And that is sort of where we arrived at working together with Victor. Along with joining with Victor, we discovered very late in the game last year that something that we had feared might take place on the part of the NRC, because we had been sort of frostbitten by this before. We were very sensitive to it, and it turned out to be true. They were going to frostbite us again. They were going to act to pass the license amendment request before we had a chance to bring our case before their court. And we filed an emergency enforcement petition in our first act with our lawyer, who we had just hired, and it became a frantic effort over the course of a couple of weeks to get it done. But the reason that we wanted to do that was because their passing, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission passing the license amendment request, triggered their capability of passing the license extension. And that is in fact the reason why next year an NRC wanted so badly to get this license amendment request passed, even though we have a very strong case in opposition to the license amendment request, and they knew that that was coming. So they wanted to get this piece of dirty work done before we had a chance to bring our case to court. And that was accomplished by NRC in next year last winter. However, we still have our case, and we have now filed evidence before the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board, the gist of which is calling for, in the legal terms, is calling for the revocation of the license amendment request. And because of that, that then throws into question the validity of the license extension. That's where we stand today. So that's my part of this, is to lay that out for you. And my next job is to introduce someone else. My great pleasure to introduce Sandra Gavutis, our former executive director, because she has a story to tell you about our next guest. Thank you. Here's Sandra.
Hi, everyone. I have the great privilege to introduce you to the attorney that we have received wonderful, wonderful words from, Diane Curran from Washington, D.C. Diane is a national expert in nuclear security and safety. And we worked with her before. I did about 35 years ago. I met Diane when I was on the Board of Selectmen in our town, and we were working on the infamous evacuation plan. And we've always known how wonderful her work is, and it is such a privilege to have her on our team, and we look forward to her great work. And so I want you to welcome Diane Curran.
Diane is going to actually be part of our panel discussion at the end with Victor, that he will be moderated by Chris. But now it is time for Dr. Saouma, and let me get your slides back here.
Thank you for CITEN for inviting me. Particular thanks to the board, to Natalie, to Chris, with whom I work very closely, to both of them. I would like also to acknowledge the wonderful relationship I have had with Diane, working with her. She has been very patient with me, taking some of my technical terms and translating it into legal jargon. That's what makes it possible, collaboration between the scientist and the lawyer. And so here we are. So because I may end up with some strong statement at the very end, I think it's important, I was told that I should maybe reinforce my background, where I come from. I've been in academia since 1981, in Boulder since 1984. As you may know, in academia, we're supposed to spend about 40% of our time in teaching, the rest in research. And my research has been on concrete deterioration, aging of infrastructure, and risk assessment of structures. It has been mostly with dams and nuclear reactors. I have been funded by a number of agencies to do that work, because in academia, yes, we also have to raise money to support ourselves in the summer for the student, for the labs. So I've been fortunate to get funding from various agencies. A few years ago from TEPCO in Japan, Tokyo Power Company, for whom I did work on ASR. From Oak Ridge National Lab, also for ASR. And last but not least from NRC, which funded me for 3 years to do work on ASR. And about a year ago, I started a new project to help the US Bureau of Reclamation, to help them understand how to manage dams which are suffering from ASR. As you may know, ASR has been flagging dams for a long time, so there is a long history of research activity associated with ASR and dams, and only recently has it been discovered in a nuclear reactor, at least in this country. There were 2 other examples, one in Canada, GTE2, and one in Japan, Utica. So much for my credential. How did I come to work with C10? Well, in academia, we publish or perish, we write paper, we do our research, we conduct our test. But it's nice to see if we can also put into application what we have taught or researched on. And about 4 years ago, I came across some documents showing evidence of ASR in Seabrook. And thanks to Adams, I was able to download a couple of documents and wrote a paper which was published in Nuclear Engineering and Design associated with this topic, summarizing what I read, highlighting what I thought was wrong, and highlighting what probably should be done. Soon after I got my grant from NRC, I may mention it was about $700,000 for 3 years, and NRC gave another $7 million to NIST to do research on ASR. The reason I mentioned that because in about 20 minutes, I would come to say that all of this money was wasted because NRC never listened, never read, never applied either what I did or what NIST has done, which is a bit shocking. NIST is the National Institute of Science and Technology, formerly National Bureau of Standards. And then when I read those documents from detailing the analysis and testing done at Seabrook, I was shocked. I was shocked by the sophomoric approach which was followed. I was shocked about how simplistic the analysis has been done. I was shocked by the erroneous assumptions which were made. I was shocked by some of the statements which were made. I said, wait a minute, that's not how it's supposed to be. We're dealing with nuclear reactors. We're dealing with potential problems. We're dealing with safety of many people. And there is a mismatch between what the scientific community knows and what is being enforced by NRC. As such, I decided to be involved with C10, and forgive me if I say that I wanted to do it pro bono, because I feel very strongly that as part of my academic involvement, it's part of what I'm supposed to do, to educate not only students, but also the public, and but also the regulatory agency who are not doing their homework. Basically, it is sad that ultimately a citizen group like C10 is the one who ended up doing, as far as I know, the first independent experts review of something as important as the Seabrook licensing license amendment request. Okay. So here we are, and I am given about 30 minutes to talk to you about ASR and on Seabrook. So the way I have framed my talk here is to put it in terms of 20 questions. All what you wanted to know, I'm going to try to ask about ASR and Seabrook. There are three parts: basics, testing and analysis. So basic, that's are the fundamental issues, what we know about ASR. And I will be highlighting special topics that have been completely neglected by NRC or by Nextera. The testing and analysis, so of course this is based on what I have read from public document in this conference today, associated with the testing which were done in the Ferguson Structural Engineering Lab in the University of Texas at Austin, and analysis performed by SGH in Boston. And finally, the question that I've been asked a couple of times, is Seabrook operating safely now? Will Seabrook be safe to operate in the next 20 years, so on and so forth? So before we can get to question 18 to 20, let's start by looking briefly about what is ASR. From chemistry, we all remember that there are, whenever we have an acidic and the basic components, they react, and then we have reactions. In our case, we have cement, which is alkaline, and we have in the aggregate some silica, which is acidic. They react together and we get an alkali silica reaction. The problem with this reaction is that it grows, it swells. And not only does it swell, as a result of the swell we also have cracks because concrete is weak in tension. And very soon those cracks are going to be filled with gel. So it will have gel inside the crack, the whole thing is swelling. It's swelling, it's causing cracking. And those cracks are so-called map cracks, which are easily identifiable in the structure. If we happen to have reinforcement, those cracks tend to align themselves with the reinforcement. And the problem with ASR is that it's going to reduce the strength of the concrete. It is going to reduce the capacity of concrete to carry tensile forces. It is going to result in increased deformation, that's what we call elastic modulus. And it's going to reduce the shear strength of concrete. And I'm saying shear strength of concrete, and not talking about shear strength of structural components, because that's a game that Nextera have been playing. They're going to test on reinforced concrete beams. We're talking here about the concrete itself. Also something which has been neglected and all the investigation have seen, there was no attempt to properly understand the type of aggregate that we have. I mentioned that the reaction is caused in part not by the silica present in the aggregate. While not all aggregates are created equal. Some of them are so-called early expansion, some of them are called late expansion. That is, some of them will take them only 15 years to expand, others might take them 50 years to expand. We have to make the distinction between the two through appropriate petrographic studies. Also, for those of you who are not familiar with concrete, concrete is essentially cement, aggregate, sand, and water. Well, sand can also be reactive, and the sand would react much quicker than the aggregate because it's much smaller. It has what we call a larger surface to volume ratio. So the sand would react immediately, almost immediately, but the aggregate would react later on. So those are subtleties which are important in properly understanding what is going on at Seabrook. So the concrete swells. You can look at it as a sponge which is swelling. If you constrain the swelling in one direction, the swelling would increase in the other direction. So again, it's swelling what we call isotropically in one direction. If you constrain it in one direction, it increases the swelling in the other two. In the case of Seabrook, we have confinement in the vertical and in the circumferential because of the reinforcement. But there is no confinement in the out-of-plane direction, so most of the expansion is in the out-of-plane direction. That has some impact also on some of the tests that I will be talking about. One of the questions is, okay, we have observed that there is swelling, that there is ASR. typically it takes many years before we notice that there is ASR. And at some point we say, wow, there are cracks here, or the structure is deforming too much. Can we make a guess as to how much swelling occurred since the concrete was cast? And the answer is yes, we can make a rough estimate. And that's what our colleague petrographer can do through something called damage rating index. I will show you this result in a minute. However, it requires some highly qualified petrographer. And those are not necessarily floating around Boston. Then the next question, okay, I have ASR. I am told that it expands with time. Can we have a rough idea by how much it's going to swell and for how long it is going to swell? That's an important question. We want to know, are we talking about 0.1%, 0.3%? By the way, 0.1 is quite a bit, it's a lot. 0.1, 0.3%. Is it going to take 10 years, 20 years, or 50 years? Again, there are tests which were not done, and those are called accelerated expansion tests. Basically, like any chemical reaction, every chemical reaction is what we call thermodynamically driven, which means you increase the temperature, the reaction goes faster. As simple as that. So you take a block of concrete, you put it in a room at 38 degrees centigrade or 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or 60 degrees centigrade, and you accelerate the reaction. So let's say, simplistically put, in 1 year you can get the expansion of 20 years. Never done. Those tests were never done. Yet it could have been done. I can take a specimen that's cutting edge, but it's done, and run a test and have an idea about how much swelling to expect within the next 20 years. How does ASR increase with time? And this is the famous sigmoid curve that we see very often. It follows an S shape of the reaction, the expansion, sorry. It starts very slowly, it accelerates. At some point, you are going to eat up either all the silica or all the alkali. One of the two is going to be completely consumed, so the reaction has to stop. And that will be at this stage. We don't know right now if we are here, or there. There are methods to estimate that. They were not done. I mentioned earlier that we need to address ASR by performing good petrography tests and determine something called damage rating index. What does it mean? It means taking a slice of concrete, putting it into a microscope, and look at potential crack within the aggregate, as in here. You can see that small crack in here. This is one of the best ways to assess the health, the deterioration of the concrete. That's not been done. That has not been done. Instead, what is being done, they are relying on so-called crack index on the surface, and I will talk about that later on, which is very misleading. And there are curves which correlate damage rating index with expansion. Exactly what we need. If the petrographer can tell me your damage rating index is equal to X, I can estimate roughly how much expansion has taken place. This picture shows you how we perform the so-called accelerated expansion test. We take a cylinder, we place small marker discs, we put it in a container with water, and we put that, inside, I call it, it's not oven, inside a container which can be heated up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit if need be. Every X days, we take the specimen out and we measure the distance between those 2 points. By measuring the distance between those 2 points, we can determine the expansion as percentile. And we repeat that until we are reached a curve similar to this one. Then we can say, well, at a temperature of 60 degrees, I got a total expansion, let's say, of 0.12%. That's what I need to know. And there are formulas, I think you saw, which can take us from 60 degrees to the room temperature, or the temperature at which my structure lives. So colder the temperature, the slower the reaction. The reaction would progress very slowly in New Hampshire. The reaction would progress much faster in Texas, because it's much warmer now. Then we have this equipped with this information, the damage rating index, which tells us what is the past expansion, or give us a good estimate for the past expansion, with a so-called accelerated test, which tells us by how much it's going to expand in the future. Those are essential parameters we take and put them in a so-called mathematical model, and our jargon is called finite element. Finite element is taking a complex structure and breaking it into bricks or tetrahedron and modeling it. Very commonly used. We use that technique to model building, cars, ships, submarine, and nuclear reactors. This is an analysis which I had performed, where there is swelling of the concrete below grade, because that was underwater. This is not Seabrook, by the way. This is just a generic nuclear reactor structure. And I was also in the past involved with cracking or delamination of a nuclear reactor, which was in Florida at Crystal River. So this is another finite element model of Crystal River. Why do we have different color in here? We have different color because of different properties, different amount of reinforcement. So we perform our analysis. In 2019, we don't satisfy ourselves with very simplistic, so-called linear elastic analysis, because life is non-linear and life is not deterministic. So we have also, and things are not also always static. The main concern with Seabrook is that deterioration of the concrete is going to reduce the shear strength, that is the capacity of the structure to resist lateral load due to earthquake. Okay? So the main concern is not some major damage occurring just under the self-weight or under wind load. It's most likely, and I'm choosing my word carefully, most likely under seismic load. And we do have to account for seismic load in New Hampshire, no doubt about it. And so we need to perform dynamic analysis. So we need to perform dynamic and nonlinear analysis. And as I mentioned earlier, until about 20 years ago, there was a certain arrogance from the part of engineers. We know it all. I'm going to give you an answer to the last decimal. Well, life is not always known. Life is full of unknowns. So NRC was a pioneer in introducing a model of analysis, which is risk-based assessment, probabilistic-based assessment. In other words, I do not know exactly a certain property. I'm going to assign to it what we call a probability distribution function. It's going to be like a bell curve. I know a mean and a standard deviation, and it will operate within that realm. And all my analysis will follow consequentially, which means at the very end, I will not say in the year 2025 it's going to be cracked. I will say in the year 2025 there is X% likelihood that it's going to crack. And this is a procedure that is very well accepted and has been pioneered by the NRC. None of that was done for Seabrook. So, are there many other structures suffering from ASR? I mean, you're not alone. There are other structures which suffer from ASR. As I mentioned earlier, there are some pretty large dams which suffer from ASR. Some of them are north from here, Canada. In Quebec, there is a huge dam, Beauharnois. In New Brunswick, there is a huge dam called Mactaquac Dam. They both suffer from ASR. They're both extremely expensive to replace because they are confronted with the question, should we tear down those dams and replace them or not? So we're talking about decision in the order of $1.2 to $1.8 billion. And yet they suffer from ASR. However, Canadians are a clever bunch of people, as we know. And they have the best people surrounding those entities, many famous Canadian researchers from university. Hydro-Quebec has some great scientists, and I happened to have been in Quebec last week, visited them. They have things under control. They are following it. They are doing the so-called DRI, they are doing the so-called accelerated expansion test. They are monitoring it in a much more, forgive me the term, intelligent way than it's done in Seabrook. Again, we cannot compare apple with banana, because on one hand we have dam, on the other hand we have a reinforced concrete structure. Nevertheless, I would feel comfortable living downstream from those dams, because I know it is very well analyzed, documented, and extremely rigorous scientifically, as it should be. Any structure which even a minor accident is likely to result in even one fatality is too much. So yes, so there is in Canada a number of examples of structures suffering from ASR, investigated, monitored by highly skilled engineers, and strong interaction with academia and research community. Some of the best experts on ASR are to be found in Laval, Seabrook, Seabrook, and University of New Brunswick. That doesn't mean that there are not some good ones also at the University of Texas, who have not been called upon, by the way. So how does ASR affect the nuclear plant, which is getting closer to our problem? The biggest concern is the shear strength during an earthquake. So basically you have a cylinder and you have a lateral load due to earthquake. The structure is to resist what we call shear forces at the base. At the base, not at the top, at the base. Okay? If the concrete at the base has been deteriorated as a result of ASR, there is room for concern. So the biggest concern is whether or not the structure can resist the seismic excitation. Especially that we know that those structures do not have what we call shear reinforcement. There is vertical reinforcement, there is circumferential reinforcement, but there's not out-of-plane reinforcement. So this is a major concern. It's really the response of the structure when it is subjected to lateral excitation. And I'm not talking about wind, of course, I'm talking about seismic. I put a note here preemptively because Nextera and their subcontractor have said, well, we have tested beams and reinforced concrete beams, and we found out that in reinforced concrete beam, the shear strength is stronger than otherwise. Why? Because ASR is expanding, there is reinforcement, so that puts it under compression. So sure enough, it increases shear strength. Why did they need to spend more than $100 to do this test? Anybody could have told them. But it's evident. However, what they have happened is that they have made an amalgamation between testing beams and testing materials. And my concern is that those beams, I think it is somewhere here, were not really representative. In other words, they made assumption as to what is representative of a nuclear reactor, and let's test it. Well, it is not representative. The details can be found in some of our report. The concrete mix was supposed to be identical, similar, representative, depending on which version of the document you read, you will see different adjective. It's none of the above. I mean, they use aggregate. They use a limited amount of aggregate from a source close to Seabrook, according to the public document. Okay? There is no indication in the public document that it is identical. I like to compare concrete with bread. Bread is essentially made of flour, water, yeast. You mix them in different proportion. You can get a pita bread or a French bread or a chapati or whatever you want. If you use different sources of ingredients, you can get a better French bread in Paris than you can ever get one from Whole Food. Why? Because we don't have the same type of flour here. Okay, and even water is important. So it is not enough to say, well, we have done tests and we got a representative concrete. It is swelling like it is swelling in Seabrook. That's not enough. Okay. So again, there were a number of assumptions which were made, which were erroneous. I won't bore you with the details of the simplifying assumptions that were made in the test. However, one of the great concerns I had is that the specimen were cracked even before starting the test. This is mentioned in the public report. Another part is redacted. The picture I am showing you here is a crack taken, a picture taken from the Ph.D. thesis of a student at Texas, who acknowledged in the introduction the financial support of NPR. In all likelihood, it is the same test that was done. Am I 100%? No, I'm not 100%, but the same type of crack was also described in the report. What caused that crack? Well, as I mentioned, concrete swells. If it is constrained in this direction by the rebar, it's not going to swell, it's not going to expand in this direction, in the X direction. If it is constrained in the outer plane, in the Y plane, by the bar that you can see the cross section, it's not going to expand in that orthogonal direction. There is no constraint in the middle, in the Z axis. So sure enough, all the expansion is going to reorient itself in the Z axis, and it's going to swell. Concrete being weak in tension, it cracks. And that's what happens. Okay, if it cracks, then we should be able to test it for subsequent tests because it's already damaged even before we started testing it. Yet indications are that specimen tested for shear might have cracked even before the test started. It's not clear how many, not enough details, all of them, but at least that was of enough of a concern that it was reported, that there was this crack. And again, this is a picture taken from the thesis. You can click on it and you can download the PhD thesis and get all the information you want. Were ASR tests performed? No, the index based on the petrographic analysis, no accelerated expansion test. Was the finite element analysis performed subsequently adequate? And the answer is no. By the way, the first series of tests were performed in Texas. I believe it was under contract from NPR. The analysis were done by SGA, Simpson, Camper, and it was a very simplistic analysis, and certainly not one commensurate with the gravity of the situation. It is an analysis so simplistic that nobody in academia would ever think about publishing a paper or even a report based on such an analysis. For instance, they ignore the fact that the expansion is temperature dependent, they don't account for temperature, they ignore the fact that the expansion is impacted by the state of stress, they don't account for it, they very indirectly and in a very convoluted way account for the degradation of the concrete. Everything is linear elastic, by the way, and the dynamic analysis don't even talk about it, as simplistic as can be. So those are some of the major concerns I have. And when it comes to monitoring, we are told that there is a heavy reliance on two types of indicators. One on the surface crack index, on the surface of the wall, and another one, expansion through the wall. The expansion through the wall is done with what they call extensometer, and yes, those are good measurements. Those are reliable measurements, and that's good that they have. However, the reliance on the surface crack is pretty bad. It's wrong. Why? Because what I failed to mention earlier is that ASR, for the ASR reaction to occur, you need to have 80% relative humidity in the concrete. Once again, you have 80% relative humidity in the concrete. Any one of you is mixed concrete, you know that you put more water than we really need, otherwise it's very difficult to mix. And with time, the water on the surface is going to dry and evaporate. With time, the water on the surface will dry and evaporate. You have some shrinkage crack, yet inside you still have the reaction fluid. The reaction taking place inside. So by the time the reaction inside manifests itself by increased crack widths on the surface, you're already in bad shape. Okay? Because the reaction was taking place inside and not on the surface. What you're measuring is misleading. Okay? That's one of the major concerns personally I have with the so-called monitoring. Never mind that subsequently monitoring is also tied with the analysis. So basically testing, monitoring, and finite element analysis are three legs of the same stool that are very tightly connected one with each other. If one is wrong, everything collapses. If two are wrong, if three of them happen to be wrong, it goes. So, coming from academia, we like to have, or sometimes we don't like to have peer review. What is peer review? You write a piece of research, you summarize it in a paper or in a manuscript, you send it to a journal, the journal would send it to people that you don't know, who are experts in the field, who would criticize what you have written, and would come back at you saying, piece of garbage, turn it down, not even think to resubmit, or there is some value, modify this, address this question, clarify this, and resubmit. And sometimes you have to go through 1, 2, or 3 iterations before a manuscript is strong enough to be published. We follow the same process whenever we are dealing with important structure. About 15, 12 years ago, I was on an international review panel for Karun 4, which was a big dam in Iran. There was a group of structural engineers, myself, some Swiss engineers invited over there to look at the calculation and to provide advice. At the time it was still possible to fly over there, by the way. To provide advice to say, well, this is good. How did you make this assumption? Have you taken into account this? Have you not taken into account that? This is very, very commonly done whenever you are dealing with a major structure which has been analyzed or designed by one entity, no matter how good they are. No matter how good they are, there has to be a peer review assessment. As far as I know, this was not done. I understand there has been an internal review, and the internal review was by other people within the NRC, and there's no indication that they had the proper credentials to articulate meaningful comments. I may be wrong, but from what I've seen, it's a small world. I've not seen it. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the NRC has funded me, but has also funded a major project with NIST, $8 million. What has been the impact of this research funded by the NRC on the assessment of Seabrook? I've not seen it. Maybe it's somewhere there, but I've not seen it. So why spend all that money if you don't even take into account what your subcontractor or people who have granted some research money to develop? So here we come to start talking about the important question: is Seabrook operating safely now? Well, I would say we really do not know. I'm not going to say yes, I'm not going to say no. I say I don't know. I don't know because the tests and analysis conducted are fundamentally inadequate. Well, the NRC says, well, we are monitoring it. Monitoring what? The crack index or the expansion? What are the threshold value at which point you decide to evacuate? What are the threshold value when you say, well, something is wrong? What kind of subsequent analysis do you perform? So in light of that, I would say I don't know. Because also the measurements they take do not feed directly into the finite element analysis, which at the very end is the ultimate tool to assess the safety. To assess the safety, you need material property, such as what I mentioned before, the DRIs, the petrographies, etc. test. You don't need to get the expansion to feed it in your finite element analysis. If anything, you do that to validate your analysis, to see, well, I did an analysis, I get an expansion of 0.2 millimeter, how does it match with what was measured? Yes, in that context, it's good. There is heavy reliance on inadequate crack index or monitoring. As I mentioned earlier, monitoring, analysis, and testing are very tightly coupled and intertwined, and each one of them was shown to be independently inadequate. And again, this is many hours of communication with Diane to articulate and to back up such strong statements. Do you think NRC had adequate basis to relicense Seabrook for additional 20 years? Based on the document file, that is based on my reading of the document, the short answer is no. Either yes or no. And no maybe. It's no. Simple as that. And what further step do you recommend? Again, based on my experience, based on what I've seen done by other entities which have major structures suffering from ASR, first of all, take a deep breath. Relax. There's no urgency. We're talking about 30 years commitment here. We're not going to rush things. I don't care if you spend 1 year or 10 years or 20 years doing an analysis. When a student comes to me and says, Professor Saouma, I deserve an A because I put so much effort on it, I say, okay, if the answer is wrong, it's wrong. It makes no difference. And this is exactly what's happening here. There is no mandate remedy. Any remedy is going to be a little bit painful, but hopefully at the end the public will be reassured, NRC will be reassured, and Nextera will be reassured. The last thing Nextera wants is a massive lawsuit if there was an accident where they have been pre-warned that there is potential for this to happen. So everybody needs to be reassured. Nextera first and foremost. They need to perform DRI, petrography test. Yes, it is argued somewhere that they have done petrography tests and they found them not to be representative after a certain expansion. It's a very simplistic petrography test that they have done. And as I said, petrography test is not easy. It has to be done by very qualified people. And accelerated expansion test and proper finite element studies. Give a call to the people at Hydro-Quebec. Go pay them a visit. I can give you names in Hydro-Quebec. Talk to them. Ask them what have they done. I'm sure they'll be thrilled to organize a meeting with you and to tell you how they have been managing ASR in Boharney Dam, which was built over 80 years ago and is suffering massive ASR. I mean, big cracks. And catch up with the scientific literature. Don't just rely because I'm dealing with SGH, a big consulting company in Boston. You don't know. Those companies are accustomed to design structure. They're accustomed to design structure in accordance with existing codes. Maybe they're not that experienced in assessing the safety of existing structure, which is a bit more complicated, which requires what we call nonlinear analysis. And so that information can be found easily if you go to Google Scholar. Those of you have ever heard of Google Scholar, type Google Scholar and do a couple of keywords, and you'll find plenty of articles addressing specifically what I mentioned here. And last but not least, perform peer review. Don't be afraid of peer review. I mean, sometimes it sounds like we don't want peer review because God knows what those crazy people are going to tell us. Let's keep it safe and hopefully everybody will be quiet. And thank God there is C10 standing in front of them. So, let me terminate here by some key takeaways. Extraordinarily complex problem require complex solution at a minimum. Don't think that you can confront a complex problem with some very simplistic analysis or very simplistic approach and hope that nobody's going to raise their hand and say, wait a minute, something is wrong. Sooner or later, things will go out. If it's complex enough, it deserves your attention, and let's not forget that R and NRC stand for regulatory. They need to regulate and not wait for the industry to write regulation for them. Otherwise, there is huge conflict of interest there. Who is going to regulate the regulator? So unless until NRC takes steps to rectify decision to relicense Seabrook with a substandard program for addressing ASR, okay, what I'm trying to say is, this is the very first instance where ASR occurs in a nuclear reactor. Probably it's not the last one. ASR takes many years to manifest itself, especially now that we want to extend the life of nuclear reactor from 40 to 60 and from 60 to 80. We are going to have more and more structures suffering from ASR. I bet you anything that there are going to be more. If a structure in Texas next month or next year or next 5 years suffer from ASR, and the current approach has been approved, all they have to do is to take the procedure followed by Seabrook and apply it, and garbage perpetuate itself. And that's how eventually it will be a question of time before we have a major accident. So this is where I think that I really believe that NRC should step up with its responsibility. I have had the good luck of interacting with NRC about 6-7 years ago. There were some wonderful people. I'm going to name them: Abdul Sheikh and Herman Grace. Herman Grace was a great guy, expert on concrete. I would see him writing paper. I would see him active in ACI conferences, meetings, very respected by the community. Abdul Sheikh was a great structural engineer who understands analysis. So my question is, where are you, the Abdul Sheikh and the Herman Grace now at NRC? Where are they? They don't seem to be present. And that needs to be changed. Thank you.
Well, lots of food for thought, lots of that's technical in that talk. And I want to let people know, we did have a few handouts of the slides. I will be posting those on our website. If you are not already on our email list to get our email newsletter, I hope that you will stop by the table and give us your email, and we'll be glad to include you in that. And, while I'm here with Chris, before we do questions, because I know some of you will be eager to get to the big Democratic debate, and we are pumpkins in this room anyways at 8:45, I just want to, again, we want to thank everyone, but also let you know that this project, while Victor is donating copious times, and so is Diane, this whole project is still, it's a big lift for us financially. We are a small group, heavily reliant on volunteers. Mike Manser, who's came in here, I'd like to acknowledge our monitoring network administrator. Mike and I are the staff of C10. Otherwise, it's our board and our volunteers. But if you are moved on the way out to take a pledge sheet, I want you to consider that, or if you're already on our emails and you've been considering that, talk to your family and think about it and think if you can make a stretch gift, because that's what's needed. And I'll let Chris finish that before we do the question.
I just want to say that I've put years and years, as most of you, or many of you here who know me know, into this issue in various ways, and have tried not to be in a position where I needed to ask people for money. But I want to say, if there was ever a time that you felt so inclined, this is the moment to try to stretch what you can pull out of your wallet, because we're facing tens of thousands of dollars of potential debt if we don't stay ahead of the legal fees. And I think that between Victor and Diane, we've been able to make fairly clear, I hope, that this is actually a very important issue for this community, and it's this community that we're doing this work for. So it needs to be this community that rises to the occasion and helps us fund the work. That's it.
So, thank you. We're going to shift now and have some time for Diane to come up, and Victor and Chris, if you want to moderate. I think that, do you want to do it?
The NRC case. And I just wanted to emphasize here what an extraordinary thing that C10 has done and what an opportunity that C10 has now to get across the concerns in a meaningful way to the NRC. It's very, very difficult, as most of you, many of you have long-term experience with NRC work. It's difficult to persuade the NRC to change and to be a more forceful regulator, and yet it can be done. And this is a particularly important opportunity. I am just so awestruck at what C10 has done over the years. Monitoring this ASR since 2009, taking every opportunity to bring the issue up to the regulators, getting involved in this license amendment proceeding with a very, very well-prepared hearing request. I can't tell you how unusual it is to get a hearing from the NRC. Paul and I just got rejected with, I thought was a pretty good hearing request on the Ph.D. Nuclear Plant. It's very difficult. You all got 5 contentions admitted, raising concerns about ASR. You know, Seabrook's been operating since when? 1990. And you know they just got licensed, relicensed for another 20 years from 2030 to 2050. During the licensing period, any concerns you have the burden of proving to the NRC that your concerns are serious. When a licensing decision is made, this license amendment request, for instance, and the license renewal decision, those are pivotal moments where NextEra, the license applicant, has the burden of proving that whatever they're proposing is adequately safe. So you're at a critical moment where NextEra has the burden of proving in this license amendment proceeding that this program they've proposed to assess and monitor ASR at Seabrook is adequate to not only carry Seabrook through the rest of the first license renewal term, but through a second license renewal term. If we succeed in the hearing in September, this hearing September 24th through, I think it's
27.
the 24th through the 27th.
Right at City Hall.
If the license amendment request is denied, if Seabrook is forced, as we think is necessary, to go back to the drawing board, that means they have to redo this program for both the current license term and the license renewal term. And this is your opportunity. It's not going to come up again. We have Victor, he doesn't blow his own horn, but he is the world's leading expert on ASR. This is an extraordinary piece of luck that he has donated his services to C10 to make sure that the NRC is told what needs to be done here to do it right, to be safe. And I'm charging for my time at a public interest rate. I'm not charging what most lawyers in Washington, D.C. would charge you, but I'm putting in a lot of time because I believe this is a very important case and you have a very strong case. So when Chris says this is the moment to support C10, I agree. This is an important moment. And you have a lot of important moments, I'm sure, as you go along. This is certainly a key one. And I just want to say what an honor it is to represent this group. The work that has gone into this over the years, and I can see how many people are involved. Volunteers, staff members. It's really an awesome group. And I just want to encourage all of you, show up to the hearing in September. These judges are going to want to see that people care about it. It matters that you show up. Call your congressional representatives. They hear from NextEra all the time, but they don't hear always from the general public. It's really important to call them up. call the Attorney General's office, tell them, we want your support. Because one thing that's really critical in a case like this is it's certainly good for C10 to be in there. Any kind of support you can get from your state government is very, very helpful. To see that state government officials are concerned makes a huge difference to these judges as they sit up there. Any showing of support by the public, by decision makers, by political representatives is going to be crucial here. I won't tell you it's easy to win an NRC case, but this, as I think Victor has laid out, a very strong case here that the work that needed to be done was not done. And he's laid out the groundwork. This is what needs to happen. You don't always get it so clearly put, and you don't always get it with violations of the basic safety regulations. This isn't talking about what if a Fukushima happens. This is talking about what if there's an earthquake that is within what they call the design basis. The kind of earthquake you could expect to happen, just knowing the risk that exists in New Hampshire. And we're not talking about the collapse of the containment, but we're talking about cracking and escape of radiation. And if there is another accident that's occurring that compromises the plant, this could be a dangerous situation. So something really important to deal with. I think I've said enough for now, and just again want to thank you and encourage you to keep on supporting this awesome group.
Are we talking about the concrete in the fuel containment tank or the walls of the larger containment building or the storage cask? Like, what concrete specifically are we concerned about? And my other question is kind of hearkening back to the 1980s when this was under construction. Is there any correlation between the kind of the quality of craftsmanship or workmanship and the cracking in the ASR, or is this just kind of a natural occurrence with old concrete? Thank you.
Well, it has nothing to do with workmanship. It has nothing to do with workmanship. And as to the concrete, to the extent that I am aware of, it's present in multiple places. Of course, there are zones that we couldn't inspect or take a look at when we were kindly invited to join the judges to take a look. The documentation actually is a little bit vague as to the extent and the location where the ASR manifested itself. Personally, I would have liked to see some sort of a drawing or a map showing around the perimeter where are the hotspots of the ASR. So I'm not sure I can fully address your question, but it seems to be in many places.
Are the storage tanks for the spent, for the radioactive waste, are they
I don't know. I
concrete?
cannot comment on that.
Yes, they are made of concrete.
But they're much thicker, is that right?
I can just tell you from my reading that I believe that it's true, Debbie, correct me if I'm wrong, that NextEra, the owners of Seabrook, have conceded that all of the concrete in the safety-related structures, which would include the spent fuel pool and the reactor containment and the concrete within the reactor containment, all of those structures they have conceded have or probably have some level of ASR in them. They've already conceded.
Yes.
Any, so you got the answers to your question?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Anyone else?
Mentioned in the presentation that there's no shear reinforcement like on that containment building. Does that mean there's no vertical rebar, no steel reinforcement that in that structure?
There is vertical around the container, longitudinal vertical. There is circumferential all around, but in between, through the thickness, the reinforcement is minimal, practically no shear reinforcement. It is a horizontal rebar. So think about the cylinder. In the vertical direction, there is rebar. In the circumferential one, there is rebar. Okay? But in between, in the radial direction, horizontal, there is not. And that's why, for instance, in the test they did in Ferguson lab in Texas, there was reinforcement in two directions, but not in the third direction, to reflect the absence of shear reinforcement, typically in a nuclear reactor. Is it entirely absent? Probably not. Maybe there is some minimum for temperature effect, but for all practical purposes, there isn't.
Any other questions? Please, if you would just speak up, we'll read them out.
If the NRC isn't listening, what are the precautions prior?
You want to take that, Tammy? Did you hear the question?
Yeah. Well, your next recourse is Congress. And, you could go to the Senate Oversight Committee, the relevant committee.
Senator Markey's on.
Senator Markey has for decades been a strong critic of Seabrook and a real strong advocate for nuclear safety on many fronts. So I would really encourage you to contact him.
If I may just add one thing. C10 is having to consider that if we lose before the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board our attempt to oppose the license amendment request, that we would then appeal. We don't know yet that we would or that we wouldn't, but we have the opportunity to appeal, and that appeal would be to one of the circuit courts, federal court. So that's also an option, which of course is going to be more of an expense too. Another question? Please, go ahead.
So monitoring doesn't give me a lot of comfort because ASR is a process that there's no cure for. So at what point of monitoring does something else need to happen? How do you know when enough expansion has taken place that something else needs to be done? And if something else needs to be done, what would be done?
Well, that's a question for next era. But for me to answer that question, I'm not sure what they could do, because as I mentioned earlier, the expansion takes place mostly on the inside. What you measure on the surface, the concrete has dried, there is no reaction for all practical purposes on the surfaces.
So does it need to be shut down? I mean,
No, let's not get there. Yes. All I'm saying is monitoring the way it is done as of now doesn't seem to be adequate. And I mentioned this.
Another question?
Given the fact that the ARS is occurring at Seabrook, ASR? Sorry. Is this likely to be some precedent-setting case?
Yes, I mean, especially that now we are extending the licenses of some reactor from 14 to 16 and also from 60 to 80. So you bet you that by the time you have a couple of reactors with a lifespan of 60 years or 80 years, the likelihood of having other suffering from the ASR is pretty high.
Do you know how many are currently operating?
I don't think there's been any other reactors in the United States identified with ASR. But what Victor, I think, is saying is that there probably is ASR at other reactors. It takes a long time to reveal itself. And I just want to emphasize something he said earlier in his talk, which is the NRC doesn't have its own standards for ASR. One of the things C10 did was to bring a rulemaking petition and try to get NRC to establish standards, but they didn't. And so the situation is that basically Next Era has been allowed to develop the standard. and the NRC has accepted it, so that one could expect that the next time ASR arises at a nuclear plant, that what NextEra has developed will be used. So this could affect other communities as well, and we really need to push the government to do a better job of, this happens sometimes with the NRC, they defer. There's a tendency, this is throughout the federal regulatory programs, there's a tendency to let the regulated industry set the pace, establish the standards. But NRC needs to take that back and make its own decisions about what is needed here and set the standards for Seabrook and other plants.
You know, in 2014, we wrote a rulemaking. And when we did it, what we said was that we knew what the tests need to be done with Seabrook. And the tests were not done by the NRC, and they had the tests available. And what we asked was, we don't know if the other plants in this country have ASR, but they all have concrete. And we don't know how much it has affected any other plant, and they refused to do both. So the NRC has not taken the acceptance for doing the testing that was required, and we asked them to do it on all plants, and they refused.
I just want to add that the NRC allowed the owners of Seabrook NextEra to maintain a proprietary status for the testing and analysis that was done. And there are two aspects to the consequences for that. On the one hand, the owners of Seabrook are saying that their intention has been that they would then be able to sell to other reactors the methodology necessary for testing and monitoring for ASR should it arise at other reactors. But the consequence for citizens is that there was no peer review. They were able, because of this proprietary status, to keep it entirely away from scientists like Victor, and people of equal stature to Victor around the country and around the world. The only reason that Victor was able to see the proprietary documents was because he became part of our case. So that was how this proprietary status has worked in to NextEra's benefit. That isn't mentioned very often. And that is why we are calling for peer review being a crucial part of any testing and analysis methodology that is to be accepted for a license amendment for ASR. Any other questions?
We have time for one or two more. The library is going to start getting antsy that we have to clear out of here by 8:45.
So we have to exit
Yeah,
at
so
8:45. So
keep it brief and-
five more minutes maybe, and then we're going to move. Go, Jeff.
Yeah, sure. So, Doctor, you mentioned that there are at least two plants outside the U.S. that are dealing with ASR. I think so, one in Japan and one in Canada. What have they done? Are they also ignoring the problem, or are they taking action?
Well, the one in Canada is called Gentilly 2. It was operated by Hydro-Quebec. It was very extensively analyzed by a methodology much more sophisticated than what I've seen here. But I will say they have closed the plant not because of the ASR, for economic reasons. What does it mean exactly? I don't know. I'm told for economic reasons. And like what with the one in Japan. So we have to be careful not to say they closed because of the economic reasons.
Sarah, did I see your hand up?
That was my question as well.
Okay.
I think there was also a plant in Belgium.
No.
That was also closed
No.
down?
Okay.
In the back.
One last one. Here's our last question. Go ahead.
Yes, you mentioned Senator Markey, but have other public servants are they in any way, have they been informed of this, like Rep. Seth Moulton,
Yes,
Attorney General Healy?
I'll take that one real quick, yes. So tomorrow we're having briefings with policymakers, local, state, and federal, in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and we do have representatives from those offices, including most of the congressional delegation in Mass and New Hampshire. I see Amesbury Councilwoman Pam Gilday here, and State Rep from New Hampshire, Rennie Cushing in the back, as well as Representative Harb. Thank you again for coming. So yes, there's tonight, and then there's tomorrow as well for briefings. And we've been in touch with them, and they followed this case with interest as well. So, any other burning questions? If not, let's give a round of applause again. You've heard how grateful we all are to live here. This is a unique group. I've only been with C10 for a little more than 2 years, so I really feel like we all owe this group a debt of gratitude. Again, please sign up for our email list if you haven't already. Stop by the table if you would like a brochure or anything like that, and thank you for coming.